Hello and welcome to this special video. Earlier in 2016 we did an event called The Future of Functional, and as part of it we held a panel with Dallas Hartwig, Dr. Rangan Chatterjee and Dr. Kelly Brogan talking about the future of behavior change in medicine. It was an amazing 45 minutes and we have the whole thing for you here now.
So warm welcome here to a very special panel that we're doing on behavior change here at the Future of Functional. We have three incredible experts in our midst who are all doing incredible work on the cutting edge, on the coalface of behavior change. First, over here on the left, I have Dallas Hartwig, well known for Whole30 and being a behavior change expert, and is now plying his trade on even more concerning areas of behavior change necessitation than food, and he'll talk a little bit about that. We have Dr. Kelly Brogan here, initially trained as a psychiatrist and now functional medicine, and now venturing into a new world of transformational change for her patients and others in a more scaled platform. And then Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, who is delivering behavior change in front of 4 million people on the BBC. He is the star of Doctor in the House, and all three of these people are functional medicine practitioners taking behavior change to the masses. So can we have a warm welcome to these three? Kelly, I want to start with you because you, in the time that I've known you, you had a whirlwind mentorship from Dr. Nicholas Gonzales, and I know that I know from spending time with you that time that you spent with him really influenced the way that you think about behavior change and the potential of integrating functional medicine to cause behavior change. So I'd love for you to share that as a starting point with what his thoughts were, what you've been able to replicate, and what the results have been.
So yes, I had the privilege to spend 7 months with Dr. Nicholas Gonzales. Does everyone know who he is? Does anyone not know who he is? Does anyone not know who he is? Okay, so I'll just, I guess, allude to him briefly, but I think he remains one of the most important figures in modern medicine, and the reason that I, sort of formed that opinion was because of his outcomes, right? Many of you track outcomes, and Robin talked a bit about that this morning, and he spent 27 years putting all manner of degenerative diseases, but specifically terminal metastatic cancers, into not only full remission, but also offering his patients an opportunity for a type of vitality that they never even knew possible, right? And so he basically busted through all potential prognostic barriers, and he had patients alive for several decades who were really slated for dead, sometimes within days of meeting him, sent home on hospice, and they would be in his office when I was there some 30 years later. And so I was insistent that I had to learn everything he knew. And what I ultimately appreciated was that the details of his protocol, which were predicated largely on 3 prongs, so personalized nutrition, so there's not, in fact, one diet for everyone, it turns out, strategic supplementation, and then detox. He's notorious for the coffee enema. I think I've turned a couple of you on to daily coffee enemas here because of him. But the truth is, the real magic in his healing was in his shared alchemy with his patients, and in the sort of installation of sort of a belief in potential, I would say. And so what I learned from him, I had this, sort of feeling like I'm one of very few people who has, the wherewithal, I guess, to help patients come off of medications. And I could see anyone, schizophrenia, bipolar, multiple suicide attempts, bring it. And I really had this attitude that I could help anyone, and I've always had a big mouth and, sort of thought of myself as being like rather persuasive. And as Charles was talking about yesterday, I very much come from the sort of force mindset, right? Like I can jam enough science down your throat to convince anyone of anything. And he really helped me to appreciate that was a completely wrong approach. And it was wasting a lot of, energetic resources, literally and figuratively, and in many ways creating a psychic experience for me of doubt, right? So maybe doubt in myself, doubt in the potential of this movement. And so what he helped me to focus on was identifying who are the right people, who's ready, right? And so he has an intake application actually. It's like essays, and questions, and an interview with his Andrea, with his office manager. And he really helped me to appreciate that the single most important ingredient in healing is a shared belief with a provider, or of course self-initiation, which he very much believed in as well. But he never had the impression that he was doing much of anything other than creating a space for patients to heal themselves, which is like such a humble perspective considering what it was that he did facilitate in his office. So I think at this point, some of the questions that I ask to sort of, as a litmus, are around beliefs, right? Like, so what are your beliefs about the role of medicine? Is there such a thing as emergency care versus chronic care versus sometimes care? What do you really think the body is capable of? Is it capable of, under all circumstances, if you remove the obstacles, of healing? And what are your beliefs about how hard you should have to work? What do you think about taking 200 supplements a day? What do you think about doing daily detox rituals? What do you think about breathing and meditating? And so a lot of, sort of the basis for which I consent, I guess, to work with patients is now predicated on a shared belief system. And obviously my belief system has radically transformed to the extent that I have a bit of I would say, an extreme perspective. But when I share it with these patients, really all I'm doing is holding space for them to come more fully into this, powerful and beautiful self-expression.
That's a great starting point. Rongan, can I come on to you as a follow-up to that? So, you went into a situation in actually meeting people for the first time and then having 30 days living in their house to make this change, and you were able to make incredible change in this time, and it was amazing to see that. How did you get straight into this with people? Because you obviously don't have time to mess around. You've only got 30 days to get the results, and you need to start to have these kind of conversations. And you don't have like a awesome intake form that will filter people out. It's just like, here's some people that are addicted to McDonald's, go. How did you speed up that process?
It's not actually as different as you think, because the skills that we all learn when we're seeing patients day to day, about listening to patients, about actually understanding what it is for them that matters, that's really what I had to do, just on with a big microscope on me and with cameras in my face whilst trying to have that interaction. Honestly, when I've reflected on what happened and why the results were so good, I think it just comes down to connecting with people and engaging people. Because on a wider level, one thing that I find intensely frustrating is when people say, and a lot of my colleagues say this, is that, I told the patient what to do, they just wouldn't do it. Well, maybe we're not telling them in the right way. Maybe we're not engaging them in the right way. So when we talk about behavioral change, and when we're talking about these guys who, in one of the episodes, were addicted to McDonald's, well, it's trying to understand, well, why are they? What was the steps that led them there? And then trying to educate them, trying to empower them so they understand what that's doing to them. It's no good just saying, oh, you got to cut that out. It was about really explaining to them as a family. And this is, I think, one of the things that really helped was that I was seeing families. And so a big thing for me, even if I was just helping one member of the family, was to say to them, look, I think we should try and make this change together. I think it's going to be very, very hard, especially when you've got kids. I was trying to make changes with, if mum and dad are still, engaging in the lifestyle, in the sort of dietary choices that maybe your child's not engaging in. I think I really feel that doing it as a family really, really helped. And it's actually changed the way I practice. Honestly, I feel very lucky to have gone through that experience, because I learned so much. I was nervous because I was thinking, the UK, I feel, is a lot more conservative than the US in terms of how it views medicine. I could be wrong on that. My viewpoint could be very much skewed by the fact that every time I'm here, I'm surrounded by people like you guys. So I think, I sort of translate, the US is so way ahead of us. Everyone loves functional medicine out here. But I suspect that's not the case. That term, I never used that term on the show, James, because A, I don't think the BBC would have let it go, and B, I don't feel I need to polarize opinion like that. so early on when trying to sort of educate people. You know, there's nothing, I've said this so many times, but I'm so passionate about the fact that, you know, resolving the root cause, using lifestyle and nutrition as first line where possible, yeah, there's nothing controversial about that. Everybody can agree with that. So if you go, you know, preaching to your patients or to the wider public with that message, I think that's very, very powerful. I'm nervous for the second season, which we just found out we're going to be doing this autumn. Because yeah, it's great news. What's great about it for me is that this feels as though this is my opportunity to help. You guys are all doing amazing work. The functional medicine doctors and practitioners in the UK look to the US and see all these big sort of personalities, these guys who are really engaging and creating change out here, and we don't really have much of that in the UK yet, I feel, and a lot of my colleagues feel. And so I feel this is a way to really give this movement validation in the UK, but you know, it's not just the UK, the BBC being so widespread. I mean, I think the show's been out in about 35 different countries already. And so although the term functional medicine isn't being spread through the show that I've done so far, I think the concepts, you know, that type 2 diabetes is reversible in 4 weeks if you remove the obstacles. What you've just said, you know, I think Dr. Jaffe said yesterday, you know, you remove the obstacles, your body's innate ability to heal. And I think going into the new season, I think I want to push the boat out more because I feel looking back, it was a great first season. It's really helped start the conversation around lifestyle medicine in the UK. But I feel there's so much more that we can do.
Dallas, I want to come to you. You know, I know that you've been passionate about behavior change for a long time. And back in May, we were at a conference together in Phoenix, and we heard Professor B.J. Fogg speak, and he's one of the leading people in behavior change. And I think we ran into each other straight after that and just were blown away by his thinking. I know you just went to study with him for a couple of days. What were your sort of underlying thoughts about behavior change, and how were they modified by that interaction with Professor Fogg?
So my kind of interest historically has been in giving people tools to make their lives better. And I'm most well known for my work with the Whole30, which is a short-term nutrition intervention. But I'm always interested in what other tools can be developed to do something similar, to kind of be the key to unlock something in a person at the right place and time. And I was aware of Professor Fogg's work he was the founder of the Persuasive Tech Lab at Stanford in 1994, I think. He's one of the first people to ever study how computers affect human behavior. And so he has a great deal of insight about this in the realm of tech. And so he was aware of my work with the Whole30 because he was intrigued because it didn't really follow the rules that he thought things should work by. So this is kind of the interesting thing, and we did actually quite a bit of dissection of the way we built the Whole30 program, and kind of came to sort of some conclusions about why it worked despite it not making sense with what he had discovered in the last 20 plus years. So one of his fundamental premises is that you have to meet people where they are and help them be successful or feel successful doing the thing that they already want to do, even if you don't think, this was a change for me, even if you don't think that's actually the best thing for them. So lots of patients would come to me and they'd say, I need help dialing in my nutrition plan, and we get talking, and I'd find out that they're only sleeping 5 hours a night and they're exercising compulsively. And I'm like, actually, I don't care what you do with your food. Let's look at this other stuff. And that's not really what they wanted to do. In the one-on-one, kind of clinician-patient interaction, you can usually get a hold of them and kind of make them do the thing that you think they should do. That doesn't work when you're distributing that to large amounts of people kind of on a large platform. No matter how persuasive your language is or how low the barriers to entry are or whatever. So that's sort of his kind of idea that you have to meet people where they are, even if you don't necessarily think it's the best place for them to start. And then success breeds success, and you kind of go from there. And then you have the opportunity to kind of steer people. And that was a good reframing for me. His model for behavior, not so behavior change, but to do any behavior, is essentially this intersection of motivation, ability, and the right trigger, or the right prompt. And of course, that all kind of makes sense to us. Like you'd alluded to a little bit earlier, motivation is exceedingly hard to create in people. And so much of the behavior change programming that we've seen in the past is motivational in nature. It's new language. It's rah, rah, rah. It's, here are all the reasons. We're going to scare you with what's going to happen if you don't do this behavior. We're going to motivate you with how sexy you're going to look if you do, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really looking primarily at the motivational component. What we did with the Whole30, and we didn't design it this way sort of because of any of this research. I guess it was sort of part intuition, part my clinical background. But it's primarily giving people an enormous amount of free resources where the barriers to entry are really low, and we made it easier for people. We gave people the ability to do it. And there's some like rapport building language built in that can be motivational in nature, and that can also sort of be the right trigger, the right language, the right cue for people who are receptive to this, they're receptive to this message. And in that population, people are exceedingly successful. That's not true for all populations. And so my changing gears now is driven partly by the annoyance of not making that work for everybody, because I really want it to work for everybody. And to your point about not ramming it down people's throat, it's not about creating more motivation in people. It's not about making it easier, because it's already a free program that's distributed on all kinds of different platforms, and there's tons of supportive resources. And it's not even necessarily about creating different triggers. A lot of it really is being patient and identifying the time in their life when their own motivation is high, and you're basically sort of becoming an opportunist and creating different triggers for different behaviors for different people at different times in their life. So all this sort of multiple choice, the contexts are different, and that's really what I'm working on now, is going beyond food, going into like movement and sleep and the power of human connection, and looking at these other areas and matching up the right triggers, the right language, making it easier, giving people the ability to be successful, and then opportunistically when their motivation is high, and sometimes that's after a health crisis, right? We see this like massive increase in motivation to do a thing, to be consistent with a certain behavior after a health crisis. And those of you who are physicians or other clinicians can often create that health crisis, or the perception of the health crisis, if it's your style to get a bunch of lab work done, to look at the numbers and say, here are all the reasons why you're going to die in the next 10 years if you don't change your behavior. And that can be a really powerful motivator. That doesn't resonate with me as sort of like a fear-based approach. However, if it gets people to jump on the train, and if that's the like transient momentary motivation combined with the right making it easy for people to do, and you can get people on the train, you can change the language. And some people are only motivated by fear or pain avoidance or these kinds of things for a moment, and you have the opportunity to kind of create this arc of movement where you start where they are and you speak to them in the language that they need to get started, and success breeds success, and then you can change that over time as they start to believe in themselves and develop self-efficacy and all this stuff over time. So it's the challenge I'm coming with now is that there's so many different types of people and so many different cues and triggers and ways to make it easier and ways to identify when their motivation is high and all these different things, that like it's growing into this really complex algorithm, especially them stepping outside of food. But that's where I'm going from there, and I have this tremendous honor of Professor Fall kind of taking me under his wing and giving me some extra attention on that. And I think it's actually going to be really critical in developing a program that will be kind of I'm describing it like privately as the Whole30 on steroids. Like it's a behavior change program on so many different levels, accessible to so many people, because I'll make it easy, that it's going to be a massive thing if I ever get it done.
Why we're doing the plan that we're doing is really to talk about getting enough functional doctors with the right skill to have the transformation potential of your health that turns into the transformation of that person, that leads to an increase in, into a new story of interconnection and interbeing, and that's going to be the engine of it, is going to be this connection between these patients and the functional doctors. I'd love for all of you guys to weigh in on what you think of that plan, first of all, and secondly, why what you've learned through these experiences that would help everyone in the ecosystem create transformational opportunities for the people they serve.
I tend to speak from a UK perspective, but I think it's probably relevant. One thing you said, James, at the Function Forum in London 2 months ago, I think was very key for me, which is we've got to start act as if we're winning. And I think I run a few sort of forums now in the UK for doctors who are trying to move into this sphere, because the sort of training mechanisms that we learn about, the big one being IFM, of course, is US based, and typically not that much has been done online. So people see that as a huge obstacle as to where they're going to get this kind of training from. So people are scared. My colleagues, they're scared of moving out of the norm. They think it's too hard. I mean, how am I going to do that with my 10 minutes? How am I going to learn the tools? I can't go on a 5-day AFMCP course across the other side of the world. It's just too much. I don't have the resources. I don't have the time. It's too much time out of my practice. So I think what you're trying to do in trying to build and foster this community and remove the obstacles to doctors, they want to do it. That's the thing. The more doctors who learn about this, they all want to do it. I'm finding it more and more. I'm just getting snowed under with Facebook messages, emails from medical students now, in particular, who are, they've seen the show, or I have the opportunity to speak on BBC Breakfast a lot, which is, again, a huge platform, because they've got me on as a regular doctor, but I happen to try and talk about this stuff in my role as a regular conventional MD, which I think is the way to do it for me, actually. But they see this and go, how can we implement this? How can we do this? And so I don't think there's a lack of people wanting this kind of medicine, or doctors or other healthcare professionals wanting to practice this way. Every healthcare system, every developed healthcare system in the world, everyone is getting frustrated. There's a growing movement of people who are just saying there's something inherently wrong with this. So I don't think demand is the problem. It's about everyone in this room. It's about everyone going and using the tools that you described this morning and spreading it to their communities, because we've all got our own local communities who might listen to us or look up to us, and we've all got a responsibility, I think, to spread this message to our communities, because you'll hit that tipping point, which I think, are we at that tipping point already? Potentially. I'm just waffling now. But
I just say one thing I really appreciate you, and the opposite of waffling, is when you go on TV, what you're really, really good at is listening to the question, giving a little bit of information to make them feel like their question was valid, and then segueing into talking about inflammation-based models of psychiatry or anything that you really want to talk about. And that's not an easy skill to learn, and that's not something they teach you in medical school. And I'm really, when I saw you do that piece on inflammation-based psychiatry, I was like, this is a key asset for our movement, because to be able to reframe these conversations and talk about the thing that needs to be talked about instead of what they want to talk to you about is really crucial. Kelly, can you just talk about your journey from being like a psychiatrist to functional medicine? Is not, everyone's heard that bit. I want to ask you about your journey from very supplement and lab focused functional doctor to an agent of transformational change, and what that looks like, and how your mindset changed, and what the results have been like on the other side of that.
Yeah. So I've been really interested in the parallel processes. I think I was very influenced by Charles's work because it gave me a lot of language to describe what it is that I'm talking about now. But I underwent this tremendous sort of like energetic shift and then integration personally in the past couple of years, where I really moved from, the story of separation, even in my persona, right? So very sort of like apply enough force and you will see change. Everything is about, intellect and science having the answers, even in the functional medicine realm. So, right? So like how many pathways, like how much can I kill that Krebs cycle? Like how close can I get to really mastering, like all the details of the desaturase enzymes and fatty acid, synthesis. And so in many ways, adopting functional medicine for me was just a shifting the enemy in a way, of course, in a more potentially beneficial way, but it limited me personally in my practice, because I was still working with the concrete. I was still working with the intellect. And so when I began to, develop a different kind of sense for the promise of energy medicine, for example, and the promise of a type of healing that has nothing to do with my intellect, then my outcomes began to, drop my jaw. And these aren't even outcomes that I can properly quantify maybe the way that Robin can, for example, or Nick Gonzales could. Because, I was joking with John and Sayer earlier about how in my practice I have almost like a 90% divorce rate before I finish with my patients. And, these are the types of changes that happen, changes in career, decisions about parenthood, changes in location the globe over, and deep contact with a sense of manifesting personal gift, right? So to be able to inspire your patients to do that, you have to have done that, right? You have to know, as Charles was saying, what's your gift? So that was such a powerful exercise I think he had us do, because if we can't answer that question, then we can't help our patients, and forget patients, like the people that we interact with, we can help them to get closer to that. So I began to appreciate, again, as I was alluding to earlier, the role and the power of belief, right? So then I understood, okay, so if I run a 4-point salivary cortisol, what am I really learning? Am I learning about what that cortisol is doing at the receptor, what it's doing epigenomically? Am I really gaining any meaningful understanding into this patient? And my ultimate, opinion was no. And I realized that I was using it as a rhetorical tool, as a placebo effect enhancer, right? As you said, if I can communicate to them that there's a reason that they should feel interested or motivated or adopt this version of the ritual that I'm offering them, then I would employ these kinds of tests. But I began to feel I had less and less need for that if I could just offer them a month-long experience of contact with a type of remembrance, right? So that's why the readiness and the belief system are everything. And that's why this isn't for everyone, right? Like having this mercenary mentality that we have to go out there and convert the masses is wrong. I really think all we need to do, it's like Charles was saying about the push and the pull, right? I'm really into the pull part, right? Like just to resonate, the potential is all we need to do, because it's awesome. Like how many people in a clinical practice have the opportunity to offer their patients an experience of like radiance and joy and like deep relationship to their sole purpose, like these are things I would have totally rolled my eyes at, but there's something sort of appealing about it, right? Like there's something you sort of pay attention to the possibility, especially if it's potentially coming from someone who takes their job pretty seriously, right? So I think that's how and why I've graduated to this different model, because if I can offer patients who have a latent, maybe many times like gauzed over, but a latent belief that there's something possible, right? The more beautiful world their heart knows is possible, then all I have to do is create an experience for them to contact with that belief. And, so in the 30 days, it has nothing to do with me. They don't need to meet with me. In fact, I, just launched a course that proves that it has nothing to do with me. So it's meditation. So I think that we need to employ ancient technologies. It can be anything of your choice. Many of you are trained in Eastern medicine here in the room. But I do believe that in order to sort of make contact with this more sort of feminine model, we need to engage the tools that are so available to us. So it's nutrition based. And then a lot of it is just sort of like, again, removing, as Russ said, removing the barriers. But then what happens is amazing, because obviously I take a lot of people off of psychiatric medications, which I believe to be very consciousness suppressing and warping. And so as they come off these medications, I've almost begun to pay attention to, it's like halfway down the titration, about 50% of the dose, or the final 50%, they are in alien territory, right? And it's like they don't even recognize the terrain. So, I had a patient say the other day, I used to be a vegan, a Democrat, and a feminist, and now I have no idea what I am, and it's very disabling, right? If you don't have someone to hold that space for you, which again is, you're talking about the triggers, and I really think that maybe one of the most important things we can do is create a space for people to move through suffering and struggle and to come into contact with a latent experience of grief on many, many different levels, been very influenced by the work of this guy Francis Weller, who talks a lot about, many types of grief, from planetary, just look outside, like Charles was saying, look outside and feel the sadness that's in there. It's the type of grief that we contact when we are ill, right? When we have an experience of the transience of this, all of it, right? Even the grief that's inspired by falling in love, what if it goes, So the grief is so many levels deep. And if we can just create a space for it to be, without reflexively having to do much, we've done something tremendous. And if from that space we can, create sort of like a landscape of possibility, I'm not sure how much supplements or testing has to do with that apart from the ritual, right? So your ritual is your ritual, and that's how you engage your patients, and that's your personal manifestation of gift. And I've become sort of interested in quantifying this, related to what you were saying about triggers. I've watched for different archetypes because I don't think that everyone enters in the same way. And I've sort of noticed, at least in my practice, there are 4 archetypes. There's I called it the firewalker, right? So it's people who've been really burned and they're really pissed. So this is my model, right? So they feel this great sense of injustice, they've been medication injured or somehow done wrong by the system, and now they're railing against it and they're going to get better. And in my experience, these people really need to come into some sort of contact with their hearts before they can move forward and before they can heal. So they can do functional medicine until they're blue in the face in the classic medicine model, and they won't get where they need to go. So I'm, a zealot about Kundalini yoga, and these are the types of patients I would work with in ancient technology like that first. And then there are others who are the doer, right? So these are the classical nutrition, and this is the whole 30 people who enter, heal physically, and then, believe that so much more is possible, because if that's possible, well, let me re-examine everything. And then, anyway, so there's another one, it's called the intuitive, which is, I think there are some people who are just natively this way, right? Who are brought up spiritually awake and, body conscious, and when they experience a moment of crisis, this natural fear and maybe even grief sets in, and they doubt everything that they already knew, right? And so I think these people, community is the most important element, a sense of being held in their native beliefs while they're entering through their personal crisis. That's more important than nutrition or meditating. And then I think there's one I've called the observer, right? Which is people who are really change resistant, but they know that something's possible. And so there's this little bite-sized menu you can offer them of everything. And so I think it's, I think something really exciting is happening right now. And I think that's how and why I've moved from a place of real, almost hopelessness about an awareness of how wrong things are, and into a space of just expanded inspiration. And I think it's what we're all feeling, right? I think it's a universal awakening. You asked, Charles, didn't you? Why are so many of us, why are you being contacted by so many people who are awake? So
I was trying to get him to segue into the last bit of his book, but he didn't take the cue. So we'll do that another time. Okay, yeah, Dallas.
So I actually just want to nitpick at something I disagree with in what you said, which is really this little thing where you're
I don't need to be right. So it's
well, just your comment that the online course has nothing to do with you, and kind of shows that people's success through that shows that it's nothing to do with you. And I actually don't see it quite that way, and maybe I'm nitpicking, but I think that it has everything to do with you, because you're the right voice, trigger, prompt, time and place, context for that person. And that's what really all of us here are, in different places for different people. We're different triggers, we're different voices. I think about it as we're all different keys for different locks. And for every person has different locks at different times and points in their life. And for people who are stupendously successful in a transformative way with the Whole 30 was a catalyst for a rate limiting reaction. And you can kind of get past that point and really go on and have massive and prosperous lives after that. But sometimes it's a very momentary thing and transient thing, and then there's the run into yet another roadblock, and they need a different key at that time for that lock. And we all we could be that in succession, for different people in different times. So that's the cool thing about a place like this, where we can all do those different things and create different platforms and resources and triggers and create abilities for people to make things easier. And there's no right way. It's like a novelist writing a story, I might love a book and it might not resonate with you at all. And it's just a different thing that resonates with a different person at a point in time. And I think that's a really exciting idea, because none of us have to be right, but we're always going to be right for somebody. And it's finding that person, whether it's patients who come face to face, patients who come to us virtually, patients who read our content online, or any other interface. That's a fun thing, because there's no wrong way to do it. Like, if it works for somebody, it's the right way to do it. And you can create one way and to be really good at that for a really small subset of the population. You can create a menu of different approaches. You can do what most good clinicians do, and they speak in a different voice to different patients. So you have different, all these different kind of resources as you go, because you approach those different archetypes differently, right? Like, all of you who are clinicians already know this. You speak to different people differently, and that's a really cool idea. But it does have to do with you. And going back to what we were talking about yesterday, giving yourself permission to accept the fact that you are the perfect trigger for one person at one point in time that can be massively transformed is a really powerful idea. And you're not the right trigger for everybody, and you can't create the right resources for everybody, but you're the right person for somebody always there. And that's a huge thing. And the more versatile you get with your kind of triggers and cues and all this kind of stuff, you are better with a wider range of patients. But you can also get extraordinarily specialized with a certain type of patient and develop a very niche practice, and that voice resonates so powerfully with a certain subset of the population that you become known as the expert in that stuff. And you just have to figure out what that is. But so I think it does have everything to do with you as the conduit or as the carrier of this big ring of keys.
Awesome. Rangan, please.
I was just two things I was going to comment on. When both of you were speaking, actually, there's obviously, we all deal with different patients in different ways. I think that's a skill in being a clinician, really, is understanding that patient in front of you. And obviously, Kelly sort of spoke about these 4 subtypes that she's come across in her practice. It reminded me of Dr. Sachin Patel here. You did, I think, a Facebook Live a few weeks ago, and you put in it how you, in your practice, you, I think, do questionnaires for patients when they come in, and what kind of learners are they, or, how do they like to receive their information? And by sort of subtyping them, then you can give them appropriate information for them in a way that they wish to receive it. And that really resonated with me, actually, when I heard that. And again, like a lot of these things, you can also apply that with patients in relationships. I'm conscious my wife is sitting here at the moment, but we like to hear different things in different ways. So I think that's really important. The other thing I wanted to comment on was this whole thing about supplementation, but more importantly, testing. I think a few years back, I used to do a lot more testing than I do now. I'm personally moving away from doing as much testing because I feel that when you spend time with that patient, really understanding them, and dealing with the basics, the eating well, the moving well, the sleeping well, the relaxing well, the whole circadian rhythm, getting that back on track, it is amazing what the knock-on effect of that is. And the times I tend to use testing more now is when I need to show that patient, that if a patient needs to see that in order to engage change. So in one of the episodes in Doctor in the House, there was a family I was trying to help. There was a type 2 diabetic gentleman, and his wife was a menopausal, sort of had really bad menopausal symptoms. And so the diet was predominantly sort of implemented around the diabetic, because he'd been type 2 diabetic for 12 years. He was on 3 different medications. His blood sugar control was horrendous. And, I engaged him. They started implementing it. And, his sugars started coming down. The weight started dropping off. And his wife, nothing was happening. And she was getting very, very frustrated. And I knew, and I sort of pointed out to her that her stress response, the way she perceived everything, was, I felt, her underlying driver. And we spoke about meditation. We spoke about switching off. I tried my best to engage her, but she wasn't implementing. And so we ran a 4-point salivary cortisol. And when she saw that, and when she saw that her morning cortisol was double what it should be, it was above 50, I think it was a Genova panel, it was through the roof, she said, "Oh, Dr. Chassie, I really am stressed, aren't I?" And literally after that, she implemented everything, and her menopausal symptoms started going down, her weight started dropping. So it's about the right tools for the right person. I just wanted to comment on those two things.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I'd love to just follow on with another question, Ron. I mean, you by your own admission are not a sort of a long time expert in functional medicine in the way that maybe like a Russ Jaffe or even a Tom O'Brien is, just sort of get new into this, but sort of thrust into the limelight. What is? I'd love to just continue that part of the conversation, because one of the things that functional medicine, if you speak to like a David Katz or a Dean Ornish, where they don't think about functional medicine, is because it has the reputation of being extremely expensive, supplement and science heavy. I mean, supplement and lab heavy. And Terry Wall's actually going to be on the September forum talking about her method of really bringing this to the people at low cost. I'd love to just get your thoughts on this, because obviously as we're trying to scale up this movement, it's also about we can't just do the sort of the functional medicine that has been for everyone, because there's just not enough money, time, attention to go around. And just where you feel like the real, I love what you said about the families changing together, but where are the sort of leverage points for the kind of scale of change that we need?
Yeah, I've heard that criticism of functional medicine many times, and to be fair, it's a pretty reasonable criticism. I think that it is expensive, it is supplement heavy, and that it is, for the wealthy middle classes. I've heard that. I don't know if any of you have heard that around the room. I think that is a relatively fair criticism of it at the moment. Having said that, I think you have to start somewhere, and you need to start getting people doing it. You need the time, but that isn't scalable. That's why what Robin's doing with Parsley Health is so exciting to see and to hear about, to make it more accessible to people. I think, you talk about David Katz, you talk about Dean Ornish. 80%, I'd say, circa of what they're talking about, 70, 80%, and what functional medicine is talking about, it's not that dissimilar. And this is why I'm so keen to promote nutrition and lifestyle as kind of my things, because look, I use supplements. I use them myself, use them with my family, use them with my patients, but they are supplementary to the basics. And I try, in the education that I do with people, I just try and focus on those basics more than the supplementation, more than the testing. I know a lot of doctors, MDs in the UK, and this really goes to what you were saying right at the start of this, which is I'm quite new into this, and I'm new into it in a formal setting. I think intuitively I have felt that this is the way to practice medicine for a long time, probably since I qualified. There was something that didn't sit quite right. And I think one of the obstacles, I know this is going back to your previous question, but it's just come to my head, is that a lot of MDs I talk to in the UK think, yeah, but it's going to take me too much time to learn all of that. It's as if their existing training has been worthless and now they have to throw that all away and learn a whole new set of tools. And it's just simply not true. The training they've had up to that point is absolutely fantastic at what it is good at. And you can learn from that. You can keep that and just supplement it with other things. How are we going to scale this? I think the US and I think the UK, we have one of the problems, but maybe one of the benefits, is that we have the National Health Service. So you are competing with a widespread free healthcare system. So nobody pays for anything. You can go, everyone has access to free healthcare, which sounds great, and it is. There's so much the NHS is fantastic about. But the problem with that is that people who are moving into this field in the UK have to charge privately, and you're competing against a completely free healthcare system, or what is perceived to be a free healthcare system. People don't perceive that they're paying for the NHS, and frankly, everyone is paying for the NHS. So I think our solution is going to be slightly different from your solution, I believe, because of the way our healthcare system is structured. And the one thing I've learned, I've had to move into private practice to do this, which is, it's quite a tricky thing in the UK to do that, because people are so proud of their NHS. But I've also realized that by paying for their own care, they're more invested in making the change. That one of the big problems with the NHS is because it's free, you can do whatever you want to your body. You can, there's no accountability because you're going to get care. Yeah, exactly. It really does. And I do actually lie in bed sometimes thinking about this. I can't rationalize what the solution for that is, certainly in my country, in the UK, because I feel in many ways you have to be paying a little bit where it's worthwhile to you to actually start making these changes. You've probably got something to say on that, Dallas.
I always have something to say.
True.
I was just thinking, something, and I think it was Dan Kalish that said this to me many years ago, but talking about coming around to this idea that like it's okay to charge people for your services and your expertise and your education. And I'm paraphrasing, but what landed on me was the currency of psychological commitment in North America is dollars. And if you want patients on board, dollars actually augment that commitment. And I think you're experiencing some of this kind of thing, some of the other side of that, where there's not the perception that the dollars are directly flying out of their pocket, ergo we're not quite so invested in my specific process.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be one of the big challenges in the UK, which is why I think these kind of micro practice models actually are going to be the way that the UK changes, because I don't think we can compete with this big dinosaur that is the NHS at the moment. It's ridiculous to try and compete with it. I think we have to show better outcomes using a different model, and the demand is there. People are looking for this kind of care. So it's, I think the doctors feel guilty about charging. I did a few years ago when I moved into this. Like, I've got to charge a patient to see me. For a UK MD who has grown up and has been taught in the NHS, it's quite hard to get your head around that. And you feel very guilty actually sending an invoice to a patient. But I've realized actually that is the currency, that is one of the currencies that change. And that's why I think we have to set it up out with the current system and just let it flourish out with the system. And then maybe the NHS will get on board at some point. But I don't have the answer, James.
That's awesome. Look, I really want to share my appreciation for the three of you coming up and sharing this. I think this has been incredibly insightful, and I hope that everyone in the room can take this information and bring it back to however they're trying to help people create behavior change.